Good evening, everyone. I am Reverend Najuma Smith-Pollard, pastor of Word of Encouragement Church here in Los Angeles, but also proud to be part of LA Voice, and glad to be with all of you this evening on this fireside chat with DA George Gascón. Last November, we made history in the election of Mr. Gascón as the DA for Los Angeles County, an election that is so very important because Los Angeles, with its very large population, influences much of our country and how, in ways in which other states, other parts of the country decide on major issues like mass incarceration. As a woman of faith, as a Black woman, and someone who's lived in LA all her life, words like mercy and justice and redemption mean so very much to me, as I know they do for so many people of faith. And I think about Micah 6:8 that reminds us to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly before God. And so we're here on this fireside chat because Mr. Gascón's values and the way in which he intends to lead align with our values. And we are here to have a fireside chat with him this evening to hear how things have been going, to understand where he plans to go, and also to see how we can be part of supporting those efforts that are so very important to Los Angelinos and even to other parts of this nation. And so thank you for being on with us tonight. And I will turn it over now to Zach Hoover, Executive Director of LA Voice, and Tim Cornegay, one of the lead organizers. And I want to leave you with this blessing, which is, it is a blessing to be called a faith leader at a time like this. And so for all of you that are on this evening and those that are watching, what a blessing it is for all of us. And you all are a blessing for us tonight. And I'll hand it over now to Zach Hoover.
So, thank you.
Go ahead, Tim.
For that gracious and beautiful lead in. And thank you, DA Gascón, for joining us this evening. I just would like to share a little bit about my story and what brings me into this space. When I was a little kid, maybe around 7 years old, hanging around with older kids, I had an experience with the police, which had an enormous impact on my life. I found out what it was like to get branded as the bad kid. And it really fixed my attitude towards the system before I even knew what the word system even meant. And moving forward, as a result of that, I've made decisions that a lot of young Black men have made, prompting several stints of incarceration. So I've lived the injustices and the indignities. And because of that, I have devoted myself to changing the system, to root out those injustices and the people who maintain their continued existence. And I know you are just as devoted to justice and the restoration of human dignity, but we took different paths to get here. And if I may ask, tell us how George Gascón, a high school dropout from Cudahy, became a transformative district attorney and one of the most important elected officials in the entire country. What would your answer be?
You're muted, District Attorney, you're muted.
All right. I was starting by saying, thank you, Brother Tim. It's good to see you, brother.
You're welcome, always.
When I was in Cudahy as a young immigrant kid and I dropped out of school, I never in a million years thought that I would be speaking in front of you today or doing what I'm doing or what I've done. And the reality is that most kids that grew up the way that I did never have those opportunities. I was one of the lucky ones. There was probably a lucky star there somewhere for me. But, it really wasn't because the system allowed me to do it, or, it really just was pure, just hitting, some lucky turns along the way. For me, it was the Army. I went in the army, and then that was really the place where I started to believe in myself again. And then I came out of there, went to college, went to Cal State Long Beach, and really in a kind of an unexpected turn, I wound up in the police department, and I found myself after a few years just becoming part of the system, right? And really, probably, having the same impact as some of the deputy sheriffs, the police kind of hate that they used to harass us. And then I went through this evolution in my own time, where I got to the conclusion that the work that we were doing was not necessarily, not only wasn't being just, but we were doing more harm often than we were doing good. And it really was a long journey for me. And it really, the kind of some of the wake up moments for me were, when I came to face the facts that some of the kids that I was seeing on the streets, reminded me of kids that I've seen on the streets years before. And they were just the next generation of young Black kids and brown kids. And there really no end in sight to the work. And it's like it was an endless process of incarcerating poor people on the name of justice and safety. And frankly, the more and more that I thought about it, the less I saw of either one, right? And I started to work with organizations from around the country, and then even internationally. And that was sort of a journey for me. I became a lawyer while I was in the police department. I went through the civil insurrection after the Rodney King incident. And, those were all sort of milestones and places of growth for me and maturity. And then I saw the Ramper scandal. And by that time, I was higher up in the organization, and actually was one of a group that was part of a board of inquiries looking at the corruption that flow from the Ramper scandal and the abuses. And I began to work on reforming the system. And by the time that I went to Arizona as a chief of police, I immediately got embroiled in a fight with a sheriff there, a guy named Joe Arpaio, who was making a name out of just locking poor people, but he focused primarily on brown people. And it really, he was in this anti-immigrant mood, but quite frankly, often the people that are getting arrested were not even immigrants. They were US born kids of Latino descent. And in fact, we actually met people that were US born kids that were deported. And, one young man with Down syndrome that was deported, and it took him several days. His family thought he was missing. They reported him missing to the police department. And it was about 4 or 5 days till finally he was found wandering around in Mexico, and he was brought back. And so myself and the former Attorney General of the state of Arizona and the former mayor of Phoenix, a gentleman by the name of Phil Gordon, and the former Attorney General Terry Goddard, it was the three of us that actually went to the U.S. Justice Department in 2007, 2008, and launched a formal complaint against Joe Arpaio for the unconstitutional policing that was going on in Arizona. And that led me to go to Congress. And after I provided testimony in Congress as to the abuses and the problems of having local police doing immigration work, I was asked to leave Arizona. And then Mayor Newsom, now Governor Newsom, hired me as his chief of police. And then I met Kamala Harris, our vice president, and she was running for attorney general, and she was running against Steve Cooley, and Didn't think Cooley was the right person to be the Attorney General, and I got to know Kamala, got to respect her greatly, and I helped in her campaign. And when she got elected, interestingly enough, quite unexpectedly, then Mayor Newsom asked if I wanted to take Kamala's place, and it was unexpected for me. But I realized, by this time I had been working with many groups in reducing mass incarceration, and I realized that district attorneys really are the ones that control the keys to our prisons and our jailhouses. And after talking to advisors and having to do this, quite frankly, in a very short period of time, I had about 4 or 5 hours to make a decision that really transformed my life once again. Going from being a chief of police to being a district attorney, I went ahead and took it, and I ran. Had to run that year. I got elected. Wound up getting elected twice. And when I became the district attorney, by this time I was very focused in addressing mass incarceration and reforming the criminal justice system. But as I got into my years in the office of the district attorney, I actually came to the conclusion that the system did not need reforming, because the system was doing exactly what it was designed to do, right? And that was another aha moment for me. I've went through several in my life, but that was a major aha moment for me, because by this time I've been working for nearly 10 years, maybe 12 years, aggressively in the concept of reforming the criminal justice system. And, more training for police, better recruitment, more diversity. And I became the district attorney, says, we just got to reduce incarceration. And then, coming to the conclusion that actually the system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. That if you look at the origins of policing and later on prosecutions in this country, you have to kind of go back to slavery in this country, right? And you start seeing very quickly that, most of the the public safety groups, whatever they were called, during the days of slavery, really one of their primary functions was to make sure that slaves stayed, quote unquote, in their place, right? And when it was a runaway slave, it was catch him, lynch him, because they wanted to put the fear of God in other slaves to maintain the institution. And then, there's a civil war, then the Civil War passes and slavery ends officially, but then it becomes de facto slavery, right? And then the system really goes into, sort of a hyper process, and we start creating new laws and more crimes. And then this is now the new way that you go back to slave people through other means, right? So people started going to prisons and jails, and then they would actually be put sometimes to work back in the same plantations that they have been working before as a slave. Now they're quote unquote paying off their debt for the crimes that they committed, which were all just really a fabrication of a system that became very determined to continue the institution of slavery. And then you get into the Jim Crow years, and I know I'm moving very fast through history, but it's contextually important because it's my story in terms of why I am who I am today. And you start tracing it during the earlier part all the way from the 1920s, 1930s. You start with things like redlining districts, so that African Americans could not buy their own homes, right? And there were financing schemes that were set up. So you start then, you go from one, not only criminalizing people, but also you begin to create systems to make sure that people cannot get their economic independence. I mean, if you think of economic independence in this country, and I'm talking about, major wealth, but, sort of the middle class dream of owning a home. And, for most of us, that becomes actually your nest egg, right? And that gets passed on from generation to generation, right? You give it to your kids, and your kids perhaps can buy a better home, or, well, that was taken away for most African Americans in this country.
Okay, Mr. DA, if you don't mind, I'd like to interject right there. because you're so efficient at doing this, you're going to prevent me from being able to ask my second question.
Okay, I'll stop.
Let's move us forward. And the question is, like, right now as a public official,
Yep.
like you often have to confine your arguments to facts and figures, stuff that can be verified. And unfortunately, you have to strip the human element out of government documents. So, like, just person to person, like in light of the fact that you've inherited an office that's disproportionately responsible for a large number of individuals being sent to prison, and in that large portion, there were individuals sentenced to death. So how do you intend on dealing with that at this point?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right, Tim, that we live in a world of laws and we have to apply the laws, but there's a tremendous amount of discretion, right, in how that gets applied. Certainly, most district attorneys have, elected to apply it in a very punitive, very carceral way. Then, the system has, revolved around, racist application of the law for generations. When I became the district attorney, I put a series of directives, right? So one of the things I said, we will no longer seek the death penalty. We will no longer engage in using most enhancements. Actually, I say it all, but we've had some problems. We have some legal challenges there. We will no longer prosecute kids as adults. We're going to take a second look at police shootings to make sure that law enforcement and, quite frankly, prosecutors, that we hold ourselves accountable at least to the same standard as we're holding everybody else. So we've done a lot of things within the structure of the law, just simply by directives and utilizing the discretionary power of the district attorney. And we're seeing already major results from that.
So thank you for that. That was great. Just hearing it, you make me wish I had going to law school and got a JD instead of the other journey that I chose to take.
Well,
we spent time together. I know your heart, and I'm proud of what you've already achieved at district attorney. And I know my colleague, Reverend Zachary Hoover, is just as proud as I am of the work that you've done thus far. So I would like to hand it over to Zach so you and he can interact and we can hear some more wonderful stories from you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, thanks, Tim. Thank you so much. Thank you, District Attorney Gascón, for joining us. It still blows my mind that we have a DA that tells the story of racial control from the beginning and connects it to the story that we're in today and the reforms that you're helping lead. And it means so much to have the person who's leading the biggest DA's office in the country, that is one of their foundational ways of understanding the position that they occupy. So I think we want to make sure folks really know what it is that you announced on your first day. I watched it. You were at the Board of Supervisors, and I was sitting right here in this seat and listening to the speech. And a couple of the things literally made me cry, because I think it just felt like, oh my gosh, we're starting to finally arrive at the moment. So folks can see on the screen the things that you did on day one. And I want you to just take, just a couple of minutes and tell us, maybe it's like a bottom line on each of these, or pick your favorite two, right? Like, tell us why these matter so much. Why are these so important?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's start with, eliminating the use of cash bail, which, still in the system, by the way, but moving away from cash bail. What we know is that most of the people that are held in pretrial confinement, and we're talking about people that could be released if they had the money to be released, are poor people or people of color. And we know that people that are being held in pretrial confinement are less likely to be able to provide for the best defense. So you have often poor people, Black people, brown people, pleading, agreeing to take a sentence that they would otherwise, and sometimes even for things that they may not have necessarily committed the way that it's being alleged, just simply because they want to get out of jail, to be able to go back to their families, to be able to go to work, because if not, they're going to lose their housing or other opportunities. So basically what we say with cash bail is we're saying the amount of money in your bank account should not determine your freedom, right? By eliminating cash bail. Not transferring children to adult court. We know that the human brain is not fully developed until somewhere in our 20s, mid 20s. We also know that we take young people and we mix them with older people, and certainly with adults, and they, very quickly, their criminogenic factors, meaning their criminalization also impacts, they have to, just to survive, often they have to become hardened and they engage in more criminal activity, which eventually actually leads to more harm to themselves and to others. And we know also that during those early stages of our youth, our brain can be reprogrammed very, very easily with some treatment, with some attention. So rather than putting kids into an adult setting where, the saying goes, if we put a child inside a man's prison or an adult prison, you either become a prey or predator. And usually there's a cycle there. You're prey first and then you become a predator, right? But if you put them in a more therapeutic process where you can attend to their needs and basically reprogram, they can come back and be a productive member of society. We know that the death penalty is broken in 100 different ways, but just very quickly, just on the application, right? The racist application. Look at LA County alone, last 22, 23 cases that have been done by the prior DA. All but one were people of color. We know that it's extremely expensive. We know that you cannot undo if you make a mistake. People get executed. We don't have a way to bring back a human being. So just on the fact that that we do make mistakes, that we sometimes convict the wrong person, and that it's irreversible. And then you look at the application. So not doing the death penalty is tremendous impact, both in terms of justice, but also in terms of cost. It is terribly expensive, and that money could be going to public health and education. Sentencing enhancements, they double, triple, quadruple how long somebody will be in prison. And we know there's study after study that says that the longer that you stay in prison doesn't necessarily make you better. In fact, we know that actually increases your likelihood of engaging in other criminal behavior, unless we hold you there for so many years that you come back and you're a senior citizen, right? So, and there's no connection to safety. We know that we're not taking care of our victims either. In fact, just today, there was a big poll of LA County victims of violent crime that were published in Families of Victims of Violent Crime, where the first thing they tell you is that their needs have not been addressed. They haven't received the trauma care that they need. But more importantly, they're saying by a long majority, like 60%, they would prefer that their assailants be given an opportunity to rehabilitate so they don't harm other people. And yeah, we hear this conversation all the time. In fact, people that are going after me, they have a few victims of serious crimes that are very harmed and they're very traumatized, and they want an eye for an eye. But as the system, that's not what we're there to do, right? We're there to try to care for everybody. But now we see that the majority of those that have been victimized actually would like to see a different response from the system. So those are the reasons for that. And quite frankly, I could go on for hours, so I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think our friend Javier Stowering is on watching as well, and I know that his work to center healing for all those, and however they relate to crime in the system, whether they're crime survivors or they have committed harm, that really making a system that's centered on people's healing. And what I hear you saying is that's what most crime survivors want anyway, right? They both for themselves as well as for opportunities for the folks who've done them harm. I think the other thing that's hard about the moment we're in and the reform work that you're doing and that we're all doing together as a movement is that there's constant disinformation from the purveyors of the status quo. So, as we're on this pathway of transformative justice, what do you like? what do we say to folks, and what do you say to folks, especially with all this disinformation out there, to continue to assure them that, we're on the right track? And I'll just say, like, my language for it is like, we have to be ambassadors of the truth. But I'm curious, what's your take on this? I mean, they're just straight up lying.
They are, they are. And unfortunately, I always tell people you kind of have to follow the money trail sometimes. And you look, for instance, this movement that is sort of starting to come up, for a recall for me, right? And you look at the head of the group is a former member of the Los Angeles Police Protective League. I mean, a director. Then he was a councilman, very tied to policing and police unions for his entire life. You look at next guy, Steve Cooley, former district attorney, one of the highest incarcerators in the country for many years. And I can go on the list, right? And obviously there is politics to this too, very heavily on a very conservative Republican approaches. A lot of the money's coming in, but when you look at it, you start seeing these are people that are deeply embedded in the carceral system, and that they have benefited for generations, and of being part of the political structure that gives you power and gives you money. And we're going to see, prison guards are definitely part of this. So what you're seeing is a conglomeration of people that, quite frankly, fought really hard in this election to support my opponent. They lost by a very good margin, and now they're trying to find another way. And the angle that they're taking, and it's a really unfortunate angle, is they have found some survivors of horrendous crimes, where their child, maybe a young person, has been killed. They're taking those family members and they're exploiting their pain. They're taking them at a place, where they're really severely traumatized and harmed, and they're sort of exploiting that emotion in that moment and that raw feeling to make it sound like somehow I don't care for the victims, which is furthest from the truth. And the reality is, as you mentioned, the way to reduce crime and the way to get it to a better place is through healing. As healing everybody, right? Understanding that everybody has a story, that we're all human beings, and yes, we have to hold people accountable for the harm they have done, but we do it in a way that we have to do it in a way that it offers redemption, right? And that we have to actually wrap ourselves around the victim and the survivors and provide the services and the care that they need, and that we have to wrap ourselves around our community to make sure that they also heal. And so this is really, the path, I believe, and we've shown it. In San Francisco, we reduced violent crime during my stay, while in LA County, it went up by 27% during that same period of time. And we did it with a quarter of the level of incarceration. So we've proven that this actually works.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's like the recent editorial in the LA Times that said, "Let the new DA do his job." I think we have a screenshot of it. I mean, I think that resonates for a lot of us. Like, you won big time. And this movement is not new. I liked how Patrice called the kind of the anti-reformers, that they're in their death throes. But we need to let you do your job. I think, I just want to say, I think want to make sure that not only, as Tim said, are we obviously proud to have you as our DA, but we are praying for your success. We understand it's a large office, and I think that, folks could assume that it's going to magically happen overnight. But, I know there's people inside every bureaucratic institution who sometimes don't like new leadership, don't want to be supportive. You may not be able to say much about that, but I'm sure that's a factor. And there's folks who were hired by predecessors who believed in that kind of way of doing things. So I think we need to be prayerful for them as well, that they would have a change of heart and that they would see the data and understand what you have. And, with that, let me just come back to next steps and just ask, as you think about the next couple of years, us as a community organization, all of our allied community organizations, what do you see as the next steps on this new path that we've embraced in LA County, both from the perspective of what you want to do, but also what do we all need to be doing together?
Yeah, look, I think that, our community is hurting, right? We've now been over a year in this pandemic. It's caused tremendous amount of physical pain and harm, economic pain. Our housing insecurity or food insecurity has increased tremendously. There is an increase in violence in our community at the moment. And I think that we need to realize that all the things are connected, right? They're not independent of one another. And there's not a law enforcement solution to these issues. It's not the answer. Law enforcement can be a partner, but I want to underline a partner, not the lead, not the answer, but a partner on the broader solution. And one of the things that we're working in my office right now, we're putting together what we hope will be a point of conversation with faith leaders and other community and policing. And we're bringing in, like Professor Tracy Mears from Yale, who's done a lot of work around how to bring procedural justice and restorative justice to the table. And I think that we need to address the pain and the harm that is going on in our community to address violence without trying to go back to the old ways of just simply dragging a bunch of Black kids and brown kids, prosecuting them, sending them to prison. And so I'm hoping that this process that we're embarking on, it will be ready to be put out for community conversation, and that you all will be joining us, and quite frankly, in many areas, you taking the lead, right? Because there are areas where we can lead, and there are other areas where we should be your follower and work together to address the pain and the suffering that is going on in our community, but also to reduce the harm that is going on. So that's one area. I think that there's another area that we're going to have to work together, and that is, we gotta be aggressively educating our community. We got to push back on the narrative that we see now, quite frankly, in some of the very conservative talk radio and news channel, without going into the particular station, that are really, they're capitalizing and trying to put out misinformation and lying to people because it sells ratings to their base. And I think that we have work to do there. Much like there are some people that denied that President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris won. There are people that are basically wanting to deny that not only that I won the election, but more importantly, that this was a win from the community. This is a movement of the way that people want to see the criminal justice system moving, and they want to stop that, right? They know that the whole infrastructure, political and financial interests of high levels of incarceration, all this stuff are being challenged. And we're going to have to also fight that. So we need to be prepared to maintain ourselves informed, to push back, to get the message out there. Reform is going to happen. Reimagining is going to happen, but it's fragile. And we have a window of opportunity, and we have to make sure that window of opportunity is kept open, not only for our community, but frankly, as Pastor mentioned when she did the invocation, for the rest of the country, because we are that large, and we are, at the moment, we should be the beacon of light for our country.
Yeah, and I think that last piece there, like both the leadership role that we play as LA County and that you play as DA of LA County, as well as this deeper vision that's grounded in human dignity, that's using this language of like, how could we shine a light on all that has been wrong, and just own up to it and focus on what it is going to take for us to create systems of healing and wholeness. I mean, I think that's a lot of the reason why so many people, like in our, where all these faith communities, like, so deeply resonated with the work that you talked about as you were running, and also the work that you're doing now. Just one last question here from me, and then I think Tim will ask the last one in this section before we pass it over to Tina, whose brainchild this was, by the way. Ms. McKinner was the one who said we should do this thing. So congrats to Tina for her great work on this.
Thank you.
And it's a broad question, I guess, but would you talk specifically about prisons and jails, and like what, from where you sit as DA, obviously there's the flow question, like, are we just throwing people away? Are there other things that, you know, would help bring prisons and jails, you know, are they alignable? First of all, is like a real question with these values. And then the second question is, you know, what might, or the second part of that might be, what changes might have to happen, and what's the role the DA could play on that front?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that the first and foremost role is to not send people into incarceration if you don't have to, right? So incarceration should always be viewed as the last resource of intervention when everything else has failed. Not to say that there are not going to be people that will need to be incarcerated, because sometimes, unfortunately, people are in a bad place and they need to be removed from society for a period of time. But, you know, we need to, first of all, make sure that we reduce that, and that we're not incarcerating people just simply because they're poor or they're mentally ill or they have a substance dependence, you know, that we can deal with it with other process, you know. So bringing restorative justice to also address a lot of the you know, the sort of the problems that may surface in our community. But having said that, and understanding some people will be incarcerated for a period of time, then is ensure that that period of incarceration is one that promotes healing, and it's one that talks about redemption, and it's one that comes in with a very clear focus that the folks that we're going to incarcerate are coming back out, and we want them to come back a better person. And it's not impossible to do. I mean, there are models out there. You know, a bunch of prosecutors from around the country, including myself, we have a group that we call ourselves Progressive Prosecutors, and we travel to Germany and Portugal about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago now. We looked at their prison systems, and they're completely different from our system. In fact, some of them almost look like a college campus. And you see the freedom of movement that people that are there incarcerated have, and the philosophy of the prison authorities, that the punishment that you're getting is the fact you're being incarcerated, and that once you're in there, you don't need to be punished again. The fact that your freedom has been taken away from you for a period of time, that is enough punishment. So now we're going to work with you to get you into a better place so you can go back and reintegrate with society. And I mean, people actually get to cook their own meals. You know, people have, it's mind blowing. You know, they have, you can go from a closed prison to an open prison. And when I first heard open prison, I said, what is that? And I went to see one. And an open prison is actually a place where you get a job and you actually go out in the morning or at night, depending on what shift you're working. You go to work and you come back. And there are no big fences, and there are no armed guards. And you know, coming from the American system, like, I'm in shock, right? So I'm asking I actually started asking, first of all, the prison guards, because at nighttime, and they make them very small. Their prisons are small, and they're a middle population center, which also has a point to it, which I'll get to it. But, you know, I think there were two, and they don't call themselves guards. I forgot what they call themselves, some like counselors, but there were like 3 guys and a lady on a place that had about 350 men, you know. And I said, that's all you guys have? And I said, you know, when people go to work, they ever come back? And I said, well, they do. And I said, well, do they ever not come back? And I said, no, they do. And I said, look, if they don't come back, they know they're going to the closed prison, right? Here, they actually get to go back and work. They put money in the savings account. They actually can put money to pay restitution, and they pay for the room and board. And, you know, but it's a very reasonable amount, right? So people actually, when they get out of that system, they actually have money in the bank, they have employment, and they're lined up with housing already. So I say all this to say, Zach, that we can actually have an incarceration process that actually is humane,
Yes,
deals with the accountability piece, but actually leads people to go back into society and come back to be a full-fledged contributor to our community. And the
I'm-
recidivism rates are way low.
Yeah, we have a failure of imagination. And I think that, your example of like looking beyond, and all of us have to be looking beyond, both in our imagination about what's possible, as well as looking to how others have done it in the ways that are more aligned with our values. So thank you so much, George. I'm going to pass it back to Tim. He's got a final question for this section, and then he'll pass to Tina.
Thank you.
Before I ask my final question, thank you for that. But there is something that you said in that I would like you to briefly speak on, and that's about the punishment being in the sentence.
Yes. So when you know that if you go to an American prison, you're constantly being punished, right? You're treated, your dignity stripped from you. Quite frankly, often is physical abuse, certainly psychological abuse involved. And, life in prison is very harsh and it's very punitive. And what the German authorities, were saying to me, because I'm looking, even at the closed prison, it's just so humane, right? People have so much freedom. And they said, look, the punishment is the fact that your freedom was taken away for a period of time because you failed your social contract. You did something that violated the social norms. You harmed someone, and you're going to pay the price. And that's your punishment. We in the prison system are not here to punish you anymore. We're here to work with you as a human being to get you back out there so you can reintegrate yourself and move on. I thought that was so invigorating and so enlightening. So yeah.
I think people would be like, would be interested in just like hearing that. But for my next question, I want to pick up where you were talking about voting. The voters have selected you to be the DA in LA County and represent the interests of LA County. So my question is, what can we do to help move these reforms forward? Who do we need to call? Who do we need to write? Whose office do we need to protest? What can we do to support you and these much needed reform efforts?
Well, look, I think first of all, you need to hold me accountable. Accountability starts with ourselves. And, I tell people that everything that I said that I would do when I was running for office, it was a contract between us, right? And so you got to hold me accountable to do the things that I say I was going to do. And I'm trying to hold a high level of fidelity to that. I think you have to hold the rest of the system accountable to the things that you voted for, right? So it's not just, I need to do them, but, we got to make sure that other players in the space are supporting that agenda that you as a voter supported and put in place. Because, at the end of the day, I'm really a vessel, right? You took an idea, you took a concept, you took a bunch of things and you say, okay, you're the guy that is going to, at this moment in time, you're going to carry our desires, our wish for a community. Now we got to make sure that everybody else in the system is supporting that, because not so much supporting me as a person, but it's supporting the ideals, it's supporting the work, right? So I would say that you need to look around. And, sometimes it's being very obvious, right? We have a sheriff that just signed a petition to recall me, right? And you got to question, what is the motivation there? He's also in office because you put him there, and you believe that he was going to do certain things that perhaps he isn't doing. And you got to start holding those players in the system accountable, and the same thing goes across the board with, city councils and mayors and police, right? It's just, we can not do this work unless we're all working together towards the same goals. So I think that the holding system actors accountable is important. And how do you do that? Well, first of all, you got to stay educated. You got to read, you got to follow what's going on. There's no substitute for sometimes doing the hard work of educating yourself almost on a daily basis of what's going on, starting from reading, reliable news sources, right? Certainly I can mention a few, but, we know we have good news outlets in this county, and we know that we have garbage, right? And you got to learn the right stuff so you can push on the garbage and continue to deal with our state legislators. And we have we have a great delegation from LA County. I mean, my sister, Sydney Kamlager, just, got overwhelmingly elected this week. Those are champions that we need to support, right? She was being attacked by the District Attorneys Association, the same association that I resigned for the very same reasons that they went on and started attacking her. So it's uplifting the people that are doing the work, holding people accountable that are trying to not allow the work to happen, staying engaged, staying informed.
Thank you. This has been like a great conversation. I hate that it's coming to a conclusion, and we really appreciate you taking this time out of your busy schedule. And we all know that you're extremely busy, but glad you shared with our congregations and our partners. And now I'll turn it over to our Civic Engagement Director, Tina McKinnon, so she can guide us through the Q&A.
Good evening, everybody. As you know, LA Voice works with about 70 multi-faith congregations, and we partner with about a dozen of community organizations throughout LA County to build power for our community. We've invited some of the leaders and partners to ask you some questions about real-world policies that affect our flock and the people they serve. First, I'm happy to welcome Jose Osuna, coordinator and member of the Long Beach Coalition for Safety and Justice. Jose?
Thank you, Tina, and welcome, DA Gascón, and thank you for joining us today. There aren't a lot of communities that have a district attorney that makes himself accessible to the community the way that you have today. So first and foremost, I want to thank you for making yourself available and sharing your thoughts with us today. I live in the city of Long Beach, and so I bring to you a Long Beach specific question. I also bring this question to you as a person that was incarcerated at the age of 18 for something that I felt that I really shouldn't have been incarcerated for, and my life could have been different. It was a drug offense. Here in Long Beach, there are programs in place that create pathways to diversion for juveniles and adults. Yet, Long Beach PD, Long Beach Unified School District, and the local DA have historically chosen incarceration over diversion. What are you going to do in partnership with the community so that this practice does not continue to happen in the future?
Yeah, and this is actually, Jose, it's actually Long Beach is one of the communities that has been selected by the Alternatives to Incarceration Office of the county under Judge Armstead to begin a pilot program where there is going to be increased funding and resources for diversion. There are about 10 communities that have been selected, but Long Beach is one of those. And I believe that she selected it in part because of the wealth of community organizations that are ready to assist. And I know that the county's working the contracting agreements, and the idea is actually starting with on the low end, the low level offenses where the police department, if they make an arrest, instead of taking somebody to jail, there will be a 24/7 process where there will be social workers that would immediately connect with the individual that was being arrested and sort of do a seamless warm handoff to the appropriate level of services and intervention. And that's going to start shortly. In fact, officially started the first of the month, but it will take obviously weeks to roll out. And there are other communities that we're doing it too. On the higher end, we're aggressively working with the Office of Diversion and Reentry in the county and Judge Espinosa. And the goal there is to deal primarily with people that have mental health and substance dependence problems that are also engaged in more serious crimes. And we're very aggressively, working on that other end of the spectrum. Also, and this is where, of course, there is a uniqueness to a few communities around the county, and Long Beach is one of them, where they have a city attorney that is a city prosecutor, right? So, misdemeanors in Long Beach do not come to my office. They go to the city prosecutor. It's the same thing in the city of LA, by the way. There are about 10 city attorneys around the county that actually do misdemeanor work. So when it comes to the low-level offenses, other than the work that is being done with Judge Armstead, you also have to, there has to be a connection to the city attorney's office through the mayor and some other stakeholders, the city council. So there's also a process there that I know you know well, and I know you guys are trying, but I guess I say this to say you got to continue to push. But there are some things that are occurring now. When it comes to juveniles, my office handles it all, even Long Beach, right? So juveniles, regardless of whether it's a low-level offense or a serious offense. So we're already aggressively working on creating restorative justice approach to dealing with juveniles. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we're not transferring kids to adult court, and we're really moving very fast. I brought in a former public defender who's been doing work on the juvenile space for many years called Lisa Blair, and she is leading the charge on bringing both restorative justice to our juvenile programs. As well, she's also working on diversion for adults and juveniles. So there's a lot of things that are cooking at the moment, and some of them very promising that are coming to Long Beach. But I think, you got to continue to push, the organizations that you work with, there is a local component that is really run by local government independently of my office, that you guys got to make sure that you continue to nudge them and to make sure that things are happening in that end.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Jose. Next, I'd like to introduce Reverend Nancy Frosto. Nancy.
Muchísimas gracias, District Attorney Gascón, for your time with us tonight. As a DACA recipient and as a priest who works a lot with the undocumented community, I want to say, first of all, thank you for the work that you did in Arizona. And my question for you tonight is the following. This has been a time of uncertainty and fear for immigrants throughout LA. What reassurances can you offer your undocumented constituents that you and your office will be a voice for their human rights and their human dignity?
And thank you so much, Reverend Frost, for the question. Gracias. There are many things that we're doing that will have a tremendous impact on the immigrant community. But again, like anything else, this is a continuous fight, is a continuous journey. By reducing and diverting more people, reducing enhancements and levels of incarceration and diverting people for folks that are immigrants in this country, especially those that may not be regularized, it can have a tremendous impact because it can avoid deportation. As you well know, certain criminal convictions are immediately used to lead to a deportation. So diversion is one of the tools that we can use to make sure that we reduce the impact of the possibility of deportation. The other thing is, having immigration safe pleas, looking for ways to make sure that when there is going to be a plea agreement, assuming that the person is agreeing to because an offense was committed and he or she is agreeing to that outcome, then to try to navigate that to make sure that where we can, that plea agreement is not going to come back and lead to a deportation. There are some areas, though, that you also have to really, again, much like when I was talking earlier to Jose, where you have, you also have your city attorney's office, right? They do deal with some seemingly low-level offenses, but it can actually lead to severe immigration consequences. So, for instance, if you're caught driving with a very low level of alcohol, yes, you're technically under the law, you're driving under the influence, and you are, but there has been no harm, no one was injured. It was a very low level, sometimes 0.08, 0.09 blood alcohol level. If a prosecutor, there are ways to get that agreement, that outcome, to make sure that the person doesn't get deported, even though they have the same outcome in terms of DMV punishing them. So we call it wet reckless, right? Which is a term of art that we say that instead of pleading, or instead of having the person plead to a driving under the influence, you give an opportunity to do a wet reckless. Your DMV points is still the same. Your insurance is still going to go up. You still have all the consequences, but actually, and and it's just it's just the way the law is written for the federal government, does not fall under the moral turpitude arena, which could lead to a deportation. And quite frankly, like when I was in San Francisco, we regularly, not just for immigrants, but certain levels of first offense, very low level of alcohol, no injuries. A person had, quite frankly, and depending on the size of the person, could be 2 beers, right? I mean, it's shorter, low stature person, that doesn't weigh very much, alcohol level can rise very quickly. Yes, they're in the influence, but they're not, they're not harming our community in a way that you should want to throw them away, right? You want to get their attention, you want to make sure they never do it again, but you don't want to have a whole family broken up because somebody gets deported, or because somebody that is not an immigrant, but they lose their employment because they're tied up in jail. So it's things like that we can do in our system that actually teaches a person a lesson, holds them accountable, keeps our community safe, but it also keeps families together and keeps community intact. And those are the things that I'm doing in my end. But again, this is where you have those jurisdictions where you have a city attorney. You got to make sure that their policies are consistent with that, and just really looking for ways to provide, not, I mean, certainly for immigrants, but for everybody, give people an opportunity for second chances. It's so important that we do that.
Thank you, Reverend. Well, now we come to the portion of our program where we're going to take a few questions from our audience. The first question is from Laura Peterson. We want to turn to the prosecution of bad cops. So she asks, when will we start prosecuting? And I will translate her language. When will we start prosecuting bad cops?
Yeah, so I mean, if you recall, when I ran for office, there were several things that I said. Number one, I said that we were going to take a look back to police shootings going back to 2012. And I actually identified during the campaign 4 shootings that, after looking at around 50 or 60 shootings, they really stood out for me. And we had a group of community members and civil rights lawyers that look at it and say, this need to be looked back. The other thing that I said is that I would create a special prosecutor. That would be someone outside the office that would have independence, would have my authority, but would have independence to look at these cases with a completely unbiased set of eyes and decide whether the case is needed to be prosecuted or not. And that I would create a group that would be composed of community members, people who have been impacted by the system, and civil rights lawyers to help us look back at all shootings. And all this is in progress right now. So in front of the Board of Supervisors right now is a request that I made. We have selected a man that I consider to be of high integrity, a former federal prosecutor. Actually, he was a federal prosecutor as a young federal prosecutor that prosecuted the officers that were involved in the Rodney King incident in the federal case. His name is Lawrence Middleton. And Mr. Middleton has agreed to come into a contract to be the special prosecutor for LA County. Is now waiting approval by the Board of Supervisors. He's already committed to looking at the 4 cases that I identified initially, and he may look at others. And what I did with him, which is very unique, in fact, we're not sure that anyone else has ever done this in the country, I am giving him full authority. So my authority, I'm vesting in him. But he has complete freedom to make a decision. And I did that for the simple reason that I wanted to not only be perceived as fair, but just make sure that people understand that this is that level of fidelity to that work. We're also the group that is going to start looking at cases back. They're already beginning to be, they have been assembled. We're waiting for an agreement to be signed by the county. We also have the clinical the clinic from the UCI Law School has agreed to provide resources to help screen what amounts to about 600 cases for the last 7 or 8, actually the last 8 years. And, you know, prospectively, we're beefing up our police accountability unit to begin to look at new shootings with a different set of eyes. So you're looking at the special prosecutor, which I committed to doing. You're looking at the sort of the look back with the community and civil rights lawyers that is going on, and then the work that will be done prospectively.
Well, we're really glad to hear that, DA. That is awesome. I have one more question. Please let us know how you're going to work with the community on developing an automatic expungement process that is in alignment with efforts such as the #TimeDone campaign. And that question is from Charlotte White.
Yeah, I mean, you know, for those of you that have been following the legislative process, you know, I was the one that introduced about 3 years ago legislation at the state level to do automatic expungements. And I wanted to do it not only prospectively, but retroactively. At the time, the Attorney General said that it was going to cost too much money to the states, so the legislators decided to do it prospectively only, which meant that older cases that qualified to be expunged would not be necessarily automatically done. There is now new legislation that I have endorsed that is going through that will do now the retro look. And I'm also I was one of the co-founders of an organization that is called the Prosecutors Alliance, which is actually the alternative to the California District Attorneys Association. And there's 4 of us now there, you know, progressive prosecutors, that we're pushing for this legislation to get through. We're working with Sidney Kamlager and other legislators. So the goal is actually to create a state law that this process will happen automatically by law.
Well, DA, I think we're coming to the end of our program. We are so proud. I just want to tell you personally, I'm so proud of you and the work that you are doing.
Thank you.
If we didn't, to the audience, if we didn't answer your questions, we will email you with an answer in the next couple of days. I'd like to thank you for spending this evening with us. I would also like to thank all of our leaders and panelists for participating tonight. And of course, a big thank you to you, DA George Gascón, for the work you do to make LA County safer for all of us. Also, I would like to talk to the audience about what you can do to help. I'm going to speak back what our DA asked us to do. We're going to hold him accountable. We're going to hold his feet to the fire. Then we need to hold the system accountable, like the sheriff and the city council and the mayor and the police officers in the system. We're going to hold system actors accountable. We also know that if you're in the nonprofit world or just with your neighbors and in your community, we must educate our people. We must give them real information. So now we're going to end our program, and let's give the DA a wave of hands. I know you can't see us, but out there in Zoom world, let's give him a hand wave.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to turn the program over to Reverend Najuma to give us our closing blessing.
Thank you, DA Gascón, again for being with us this evening. This has been just a wonderful opportunity for all of us to hear your heart and hear your intentions and the work that you have done and the work that you will continue to do. And as a mother who has been impacted by violent crimes, I look forward to working with your office as you find ways to work with victims of violent crimes. My son was murdered in 2018. And I will say this, that there are a broad demographic of families here in Los Angeles that really do want to be about the work of rehabilitation, restoration, and renewal and rebuilding. And so I hope that you tap into us for that process, because a lot of times for families who are victims of violent crimes, our interest is not the eye for the eye. That's not really truthful. But our interests are really in seeing our communities do better and have a better opportunity down the line. So I look forward to working with your office in that area. But my task now is to give the final prayer or blessing. And in the book of Numbers, one of the benedictions that's listed in the Bible It says, now unto him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can ever imagine or hope for, according to the faith that's at work in us. And because of the faith that's at work in all of us, whatever our faith traditions are, we look forward to an incredible work being done out of your office, DA Gascón, but also through all of us that are here tonight, that are watching live, and even for those that could not be here. And so we look for the incredible work to be done through us, for us, by us, and we give thanks to God. As a Christian, I give thanks to God, but whatever your faith tradition might be tonight, we invite you to also give thanks. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you.